Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly topical news, occasionally controversial views, and better biking tips show. So welcome if you're new here, and if you're not, welcome too. Got a fairly busy show for you today. Trading Standards have warned stallholders to comply with the CE rules at this weekend's Bristol Classic bike show. German rider groups are fighting back against roads being closed to motorcycles. Swedish government, they have reversed Transport Administration's speed limit reductions, which is interesting. A man posted selfies of stolen bikes on Instagram. A speeding Hove rider who claimed his bike had been cloned now gets a prison sentence, well, a suspended sentence, I should say. MAG have teamed up with the MCIA. The return of the Honda Hawk, that's an interesting one. And as speed limits rise in London, hundreds get tickets, or at least they fear they've got tickets. So today's better biking point is how to recognise the speed limit. So settle yourselves down for the next 30 minutes or so. Don't forget, this show goes out regularly on Wednesdays and Sundays. And if you have comments, if you have questions, anything you'd like to ask, feedback on the show is always good to hear. So drop me a line and I will do my best to answer live if I possibly can, and at the end of the show via the comment stream if I can't do it live. Sue and Kevin have both looked in. Good morning. Kevin says he's back from a chilly ride. Yes, it's actually a lovely sunny morning this morning, but it possibly is a little bit cool out there. It was a nice walk yesterday, I have to say, in the sun, but it was still pretty chilly out of the sun. Hopefully we're coming to the end of the winter, so spring is just around the corner and the temperatures hopefully will be on the way up. All right, so let's get underway with today's news. Well, here's the first item I wanted to bring in. I've got the photo all set up and now it's showing me the wrong one. Hang on a minute, I will get there. Right, okay, no, still the wrong one. There we go. Add to stream, that's the correct button to press. Right, so let me just try and zoom in on that a little bit and give you an idea of what we're talking about here. It's the Bristol Classic Motorcycle Show, as you can see from the top of the thing there, the news release, press release, and what you'll see is in the middle of the screen, hopefully at the moment, that motorcyclists' clothing has to be designated as PPE, and the show are telling, are basically copying an email from Trading Standards telling the show organisers that they suspect that companies present at the show may be trading in breach of CE regulations, and that there would be a team of CE or Trading Standards officials present to check what they call compliance. Okay, so yeah, all right. So what it basically, that's what it's saying. And the email concludes by referring to this as a public safety issue. So they'll be basically looking for motorcycle clothing garments, gloves, footwear, and also impact protectors, which don't comply with the regulations. Now, you'll recall that Trading Standards intervened at over half the stands on the recent Carol Nash MCN London bike show, presumably those selling bike clothing. And I'm led to believe that should businesses who were found to be selling non-conforming garments at the previous show turn up with the same kit at this one and attempt to sell it as motorcycle clothing, then they face not just having their stock confiscated, but also criminal prosecutions. Now, Bauer Media are behind both shows. So it would be interesting to know if they had previously sent out a warning based on what happened at London, the show, just a week ago. The wording of this particular notice makes it fairly clear it only went out after local Trading Standards contacted them. Now, Bauer are also the organisers of the upcoming MCN Festival of Motorcycling at Peterborough, which is due to take place over the weekend of the 14th and 15th of May. So it will be interesting to see what Trading Standards actions are there. And as I actually asked last week, does the responsibility for selling correctly marked and compliant riding kit end with the retailer? Isn't it ultimately the role of the organisers to ensure that non-approved kit is not on sale at any of these shows? Right, okay, so don't forget, if you want to catch up with this show, you can see it Wednesdays and Sundays. It goes out at 11. It's nearly always live. Occasionally there will be a pre-recorded show when I'm engaged in doing something else, and one such event is likely to happen Sunday, I think it's the 13th, isn't it, of March, when I will actually be giving a talk in the early afternoon. So I'll almost certainly have to pre-record the show, probably Saturday evening. Right, anyway, that's the YouTube link if you want to catch up with it. We got a few comments come in. Tony said hi. He also says he went to the show with Biker Down, Devon and Somerset yesterday. Busy show, he said, but less trade stands and interesting, very few trade stands selling riding kit. That actually is quite interesting. I don't know how that show normally turns out, as I've not been there before, but maybe some stayed away. And Graham has also looked in and said good morning. Right, thank you, guys. Nice to see you. Thanks for that, Tony. Very interesting indeed. Right, okay, so what's next in the news? Well, over in Germany, 10 motorcycle organisations have actually joined forces to fight traffic orders that restrict motorcycle access to some popular tourist roads. Now, this is the area involved. It's the Taunus. It's the part of Germany effectively between Koblenz to the west and Frankfurt to the southeast of that region. It's a beautiful scenic upland area. The rivers running through it cut beautiful sort of valleys, and the hills rise up. So as you can imagine, that it has a number of lovely twisty roads in that area, and it's a popular destination for tourists of all kinds, of course, and amongst those tourists are predictably motorcyclists, not just from Germany but from all over Europe, and it's an area I've toured myself. It's well worth a visit. The problem is that you will be banned if you're on a motorcycle at certain times of the year. And since it's motorcycles being hit by the ban, you've probably guessed why. It's noise. Now, last November, Torsten Schur, he's the first councillor of the Hochtaunus Kreis district, announced what he called noise stops would come into force on some roads in the area. And in mid-January, draft regulations for a trial ban on motorcycles were announced. And these would restrict access to 3 roads leading to the Grosser Felsbergat, which is in the Felsberg area. Now, this road sign, which I'm not sure if it's a generic one or if it is one that's actually gone up. The translated report is a little difficult to follow, but as you can see there, the sign precludes motorcycles. And basically that one says it will be Sundays, Saturdays, Sundays and holidays, Feiertag. The traffic orders apparently suggest that the bikes will be banned every second week of the month from April to October. So that is obviously a clash there between the sign in the story, which I suspect is possibly a generic sign that they found somewhere else. Anyway, the point being, I didn't put the sign up for you to see. There it is. Let's try getting that up on screen. So there we go. You can see there's a sign there with the motorcyclist underneath it and the sign on top saying no motorbikes. Right, so that's what it's all about. Now, unfortunately, of course, the measures don't just target those motorcycles which are illegally modified, but they also end up sweeping up with a broad broom every powered two-wheeler operator, including those who are appropriately silenced. So the response from the motorcycle community has been the foundation of a riders' action group, Hochtaunus für alle. 10 motorcycle organisations in the Rhine-Main region have come together. The key argument of the group is that the planned closures don't solve the problems of noise pollution, but simply end up moving the issue elsewhere whilst penalising the law-abiding riders. And they suggest a balanced and sustainable measure to combat noisy bikes, although report doesn't say what it is. Presumably they are talking about active enforcement against the riders of the illegal motorcycles. They also argue that the trial scheme has no legal basis, which I'm sure will be argued out. The group promises to work to ensure that the region continues to be open to all road users and non-road users, and they cite motorists, hikers, cyclists and motorcyclists, and they say they should all have access without distinction. So, okay. Just to prove that not all measures are equally negative, you'll probably know that Sweden is the home of Vision Zero. This is an ideology that seeks to achieve a highway system with no fatalities or serious injuries involving road traffic. And the core principle behind this is this: life and health can never be exchanged for other benefits within society. So Vision Zero was approved by the Swedish Parliament in October 1997, and the concept spread to many other countries, including the UK. Now, a core tenet of Vision Zero involves adjusting speed limits on roads to mitigate the impact of the collisions that will occur on those roads to the point where they are survivable with appropriate technology. Now, since 2016, the Swedish Transport Administration has been reducing speeds on 4,300 kilometers of roads without a central barrier, and that's actually about 44% of all the state roads. Now, and what's happened on these roads is the speed limit has gone down from either 90 or 100 kph, roughly 55 to 62 miles an hour, down to 80 kph, which is around about 50 miles per hour. Now, not surprisingly, road users argue that these restrictions have actually impacted traffic movements, and it's led to growing protests around the country, particularly in rural areas who feel they are being unreasonably targeted. And the Swedish Motorcyclists Organisation, the SMC, have argued that there are other measures that could be implemented that are actually more effective in preventing crashes. Amongst suggestions are things that will probably be familiar to any motorcycle rider in the UK here. They suggest improved friction surfaces and better friction testing, something I know New Zealand have been working on. Road upgrades to minimise cracks and holes, definitely something I'd like to see here in the UK. Cleaning up gravel faster after road repairs. Check out my latest pair of 60-second safety videos. Improving lines of sight at intersections. This is something actually that was part of the Transport for London plan for motorcycling, but doesn't seem to have been done anywhere. And the expansion of game fences. Right, so, okay, one measure has particularly caught my eye, and it is this. Let me just get that up on screen. There we go. It's to make interventions on curves where most accidents actually happen amongst what the report says are unprotected road users. And to you and me, that includes motorcyclists, of course, as well as cyclists and horse riders. They mention a technique known as perceptual countermeasures, and that's what you're seeing here. And it's something that's been trialed in Australia, in New Zealand, in Austria, which is where this photo actually comes from, and even in the UK. And the road markings basically are designed to help drivers and particularly motorcyclists to negotiate the curve away from the path of oncoming vehicles. So although it's not actually a central barrier in itself, it has the effect of deflecting turning vehicles away from other vehicles. So the natural tendency, particularly of a motorcyclist, is to stay off the paint. So it makes the rider a little bit more cautious around the corner. That's the idea. And the results of the trials have been to reduce crashes. So, okay, it seems they made their point. Last week, the government upheld a number of appeals against the imposition of the lower limit on 4 roads, covering around 350 kilometres. That's quite a long stretches of roads. So the 80 signs are coming down and the 90, 100 signs are going back up again, which is excellent news. Right, okay, just a quick reminder. If you do enjoy today's show, please do pop over to my coffee page. You can support me over there by buying me a cuppa. Every cuppa is very useful indeed and very much appreciated. It keeps me producing these shows, and it keeps me writing as well, because once you're over there and you've bought me a cuppa, you'll also get access to hundreds of better biking articles from the Survival Skills archive on Facebook. They're all indexed. Well, they're all listed by date anyway, so they're much easier to find your way through. Almost impossible to find back articles on Facebook, of course. All right, so if you're a bike thief, it's never a good idea to show how good you are at your chosen career by posting social media selfies, posing on the stolen motorcycles, but some really do just that. And the latest is somebody called Dean Hall. He's from Widnes in Cheshire, and he posted a number of images on his Instagram account between July last year and January this year, which happened to show him sitting on 3 motorcycles which had all been stolen from the Runcorn area. The bikes were a Ducati, a Triumph and a Sim scooter, and they were collectively valued in excess of £25,000. Police linked the account to Hall and duly arrested him at his home at the end of January. And he appeared at Warrington Magistrates Court on Wednesday the 16th of February, charged with the theft of a motor vehicle and 2 counts of handling stolen goods. He pleaded guilty to all 3 charges and was handed a 1-year jail sentence. And Detective Constable Darrell Gavin said Hall was well aware that the bikes were stolen, but despite this, he brazenly or stupidly posted a number of images online, posing with them like trophies and believing he was above the law. Brazen or stupid, I leave it to you to decide. Meanwhile, in Hove, a biker who tried to avoid 2 speeding penalties by claiming his registration plate had been cloned now has a criminal record. Sussex police said Hamed Mashayek gave a false account to police about the speeding offences, which were 3 days apart. His bike was caught on camera on Marine Parade in Brighton and just a short distance away on the A270 Old Shoreham Road in Hove. Police said that he told them the bike had been involved in an earlier accident, leaving it unrideable at the time of the offences. And he also supplied photographs to the police, which showed a number plate with black tape around it, claiming that the registration on the bike caught on camera was cloned. But the police produced evidence from number plate recognition cameras showing the bike had been ridden the day after the accident, and the footage also revealed that the rider on the speeding bike just happened to be wearing the same distinctive crash helmet as the one seized from Masayek. He pleaded guilty to attempting to pervert the course of justice at Chichester Crown Court on Thursday, February the 17th, and his falsified account landed him a 21-week suspended prison sentence and an order to complete 100 hours of unpaid work. Right, okay, so now in the last show, I did actually mention that the Motorcycle Action Group had pulled out of the year-old National Motorcyclists Council, saying that they didn't need to speak to government through an intermediary. Now, even at the expense of losing the benefits of speaking with a single voice. The latest news from the Riders' Rights Organisation is that they are uniting with the Motorcycle Industry Association, the MCIA, to make the case for motorcycling, endorsing what's described as the long-awaited Journey to a Brighter Destination document, which is supporting leisure motorcycling. There's just a bit of a puzzle here. Unless there's been an update to the document which I didn't spot, this long-awaited document actually dates back to 2019. You can find the actual PDF there in the link if you are so inclined. However, if you don't want to wade through that document, and it is a bit weighty, I will admit, not an easy read, you'll find a very short video from the MCIA on the link there, which it basically takes you through the basics of the document itself. Right, okay, so if you've been watching the trickle of new bikes onto showroom floors, I'm sure that you've noticed that Japanese manufacturers are now pretty much repurposing existing motorcycles by changing the bouncy bits at either end, changing the styling and changing the rider ergonomics. So they're basically turning the same platform, as the term is, into a number of different motorcycles. It's been pretty well known for some time that the 10 184cc parallel twin that was originally built to appear in the Africa Twin and which made its way into the Rebel 1100 would probably turn up in a new sports bike. Now, the Japanese magazine Young Machine tends to be a bit ahead of the game when it comes to knowing what Honda are up to. And they've published a number of speculative reports on forthcoming models, and they've actually published some renders of what the bike could look like. But as of Friday this week, Honda themselves have actually spilled the beans. Let me just try and get that up a bit bigger, actually. There we go. That's slightly easier to see, isn't it? They've revealed the existence of the Honda Hawk 11. That's what it's apparently going to be called, with this particular teaser image. It doesn't really show you very much of the bike, does it? But just the sort of headlight, an indicator, and a sort of outline of the fairing. But there's also an accompanying video which shows you equally little. But the bike itself is apparently due to appear at the Osaka Motorcycle Show, which is happening in around 3 weeks' time. The LVT 1000 Def was it VTR? VTR, wasn't it? What a lovely bike to ride. I think I've probably got the designation of that completely wrong. I think it was the VT 1000, VTR 1000. Oh, I don't know. Somebody will remind me. Firestorm is what it was called. He says, reaching back into the dim, distant reminiscences. It was actually a really nice bike to ride. I really, really enjoyed it. I was very lucky. I actually made a trip to the US and I got to ride a pre-production version that Honda US were actually showing to a group of riders, myself included, to get some feedback before the bike actually went into final production. And I really, really liked it. It was a lovely, practical machine to ride, and it would have been at the top of my list for an all-round motorcycle, but for one thing: the truly appalling fuel consumption, combined with a fairly miserably small petrol tank. There were stories of riders actually running out of fuel after about 75 miles on the bike, which is not a lot of use in the UK, let alone America, where stations tend to be a lot further apart. So let's hope the new Hawk offers the same riding experience, but with fewer trips to the petrol pump. Now, a couple of shows back, I did mention that there were going to be lower speed limits introduced on 5 sites on the TfL network of roads in London. 4 20 mph speed limits were being introduced, and a road that was formerly a 40 limit was being reduced to 30. And this is actually the A10 Great Cambridge Road in Enfield. So it's one of the major sort of in and out of London link roads. Now, TfL at the time said that the new speed limits would be supported by new signs and road markings, and that it would work closely with the Met Police to ensure that drivers understand and comply with the new lower limits. Well, according to a social media storm, the police have certainly made sure that hundreds of drivers now understand the new limit, since they actually got flashed by speed cameras on the A10. And drivers using this road in Enfield have actually used a Facebook group to complain about what they say is unclear signage in the new 30 zone. They also complained about the lack of advanced warning. One person said, "No idea they changed, no warnings, etc. Doesn't feel fair." Well, if they'd watched Elevenses, of course, maybe they would have got that message, but hey ho. One local resident said, "I live 2 minutes away from this road. The camera flashed to people who are local and regular users of the road. The issue is that people were not aware of it, and the authorities have a legal obligation to make it clear. They failed to do so." Well, I'm not sure they actually need to legally to actually announce that the speed limit has changed. The speed limit signage certainly has to comply with the rules, but there is a good case perhaps for new speed limit in force signs, but I don't believe they are obligatory. Maybe somebody knows whether they are or not. I certainly don't think they are. But here's the real problem. The news report actually said it's understood that 40-mile-per-hour signs were removed in January, but were not to replace with new signs with the revised speed limit, leading some motorists to fall foul of the changes. Another angry motorist said it was unacceptable for TfL, who was in charge of removing the signs and not putting in new signs, and then had a little rant about it being a stupid idea changing a dual carriageway from 40 to 30 anyway. Now, the fact is that unless there is no or only intermittent street lighting, a 30 limit sign applies across a zone. It means it's marked when you enter it and it's marked when you leave it. So the 40 signs, as I'll explain in a moment, would be replaced uh, by a single sign telling you that the speed limit had gone down to 30. There will not be signs warning you that you're now in a lower limit. Now, I don't know if those flashes that have been reported are actually generating notice of intent to prosecute tickets or just a warning. One would hope it would be the latter, but I wouldn't bank on it, knowing the Met Police. Anyway, the changes are part of Transport for London's commitment to reduce speed limits to 20 mph on all 220 kilometres. I'm not sure why that figures in kilometres, seeing as we live in the UK, of the TfL road network by 2024. So that's in addition to roads in the congestion zone, which have been at the lower limit since March 2020. Now, this all dovetails into a question which appeared on a Facebook group for instructors only. Somebody asked, would you expect an examiner to remind pupils on test that they are changing speed limit? Now, it turned out that the candidate had failed for riding at the wrong speed after they'd missed a change of limit sign because the sign was actually completely obscured in a hedge. Now, it kicked off a big debate. But it's actually not an uncommon issue. And frankly, the failure to spot a speed limit change can happen to anyone, whether under instruction, whether riding on test, or actually riding with a full license. And occasionally the problem does happen like this when the signs are obscured. There's a 30-40 boundary on my old stomping ground in Maidstone in Kent. Now, both signs from the 40 to 30 direction are immediately behind large trees. And the problem is compounded because you approach down a dip and then you rise up and the signs are just on the far side of the dip. So they're higher up than the bottom of the dip and they are hidden behind the trees. Now, periodically the council cut the trees back, and with absolute inevitability the trees grow back again within weeks and hide the signs again. Now, most of my trainees were actually pretty good and did spot those signs, but occasionally I did have to warn them because it wasn't unknown for the local police to have their camera van parked in a lay-by about 150 metres past the speed limit change. Now, more frequently, the change of limit that goes missing will be at a junction. We may turn into a side turning and then suddenly realise that we've no idea what the speed limit in the road is. And it can be pretty difficult sometimes to spot speed limit changes on roundabouts when we're focused on a lot of other things, not least getting to the right exit. On the test routes in Kent, in Ashford, when they used to do motorcycle tests there was one very busy and complicated roundabout. It has since been modified, but at the time it had 5 exits and it managed to have no less than 5 different speed limits from the roundabout. There was a 30, there was a 40, there was a 50, there was a 60, and there was a 70. And frankly, the only way to ensure the trainees got the speed limits right on the roads was to actually teach them which road was what speed limit by rote. And I have to admit, I was very nearly caught out in London myself. I was crossing a council boundary halfway down a main road, and it turns out that one council operates a blanket 20 and the other stretch of road in the other jurisdiction was still 30 miles per hour. So for no obvious reason, there was certainly no change in the sort of the structure of the road, nothing obvious. The speed limit simply goes from 30 to 20, and I happened to miss the 20 sign the first time I went down that road after a long break. Guess which council has a speed camera installed on their side of the boundary? Yeah, it's Islington with the 20 limit. Now, fortunately, I spotted the camera, and then I guessed the speed limit was actually not 30 miles an hour from the fact that there were braking vehicles all around me. So, on to today's better biking tip: how to recognize speed limits. What are the rules for determining what a speed limit actually is? Well, first of all, you need to know your speed limit signs. So let's just introduce that particular sign. It should be pretty well known to you all. It's a mandatory sign because it has a red ring around the white background. And you will see one of these signs at the change of a limit. So you'll see this at the start of a 20, a 30, a 40, a 50, or occasionally even a 60-mile-per-hour speed limit on a dual carriageway. So remember, these signs are actually mandatory. Now, the exception is the national speed limit sign, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But that's a circular white sign with a black diagonal bar through it. Now, let's start with the relatively straightforward urban 30. With one exception, which I'll mention in a moment, this is a sign that covers a zone. So we'll only ever see a single 30 limit sign when we ride into a 30 zone. So we'll pass one sign, potentially on one side of a town, even London, and it will be possible to ride all the way to the other side of that town and even London without ever seeing another speed limit sign until we reach a higher limit on the other side of that 30 zone. Now, the clue that you're in a 30 limit that has been generally known for many years is to look for street lighting. If the street lights are at intervals no more than 200 meters apart, it's quite a long way, it's twice a football pitch, but that's the limit, then it's almost certainly a 30 limit, with one exception I'll come to in a moment. So what happens if there are no speed limit, no street lights? Well, this is where you can anticipate that you're probably in one of these, a national speed limit. Now, unless a lower limit applies, and I'll come back to that in a moment, because if we've passed a national speed limit sign like this one, we are also in the national speed limit zone. We are leaving the previous speed limit and we're entering that national speed limit zone. And it was this sign that the candidate on test had missed. The clue that would have helped him out would have been the lack of street lighting. So what is the national limit? Well, it's 60 on a single carriageway. That's a road where there are two lanes of traffic going in opposite directions. It could be a two-lane road with the lanes separated by paint. It could be a single track lane where there's only room for one vehicle at a time, but they are both 60 mile per hour if you pass that national speed limit sign, even if 60 is not a good idea. Now, on a dual carriageway, the national speed limit is 70 miles per hour. And a dual carriageway, remember, is any road where there is physical separation between the two opposing directions of traffic. It doesn't have to be a metal barrier. And it doesn't actually have to have more than one lane in each direction either. So if you're out on a 60 mile per hour stretch of road and suddenly the road parts company and there's a bit of grass down the middle and it comes back together, technically that is a 70 limit. There used to be a bit of that on one of the test routes in Kent, and of course the examiner liked to see the candidate making a bit of extra progress on that bit just to say they knew what the speed limit is. So don't forget the national speed limit is also a zone. So again, we'll enter it with one sign and it will remain national speed limit until we pass out of the zone, telling us the speed limit is reduced. So if it goes from a single carriageway to a dual carriageway, it's 60 up to 70. And if it goes from dual back to single, it's 70 back to 60. Now, there is one exception to the no street light rule. And increasingly, something we'll encounter is going to be a rural 30 limit through a village where there is no street lighting. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll pass the 30 limit into a road with no street lights. But what there will be to tell us that we are in a 30 area and not in an unlimited or a national speed limit is there will be 30 repeater signs on the post. Now, repeater signs are little round signs. They're about the size of a dinner plate. They're about that big. And they show that there is a lower limit in force or potentially a higher limit. So look for repeaters because they are a vital clue that you're not in a 30 or a national speed limit. So these signs are also crucial in spotting 40s and 50s. As I said, you will get a 50 speed limit like that one. Bring that one back up on screen. There it is. You'll get a 50 speed limit sign like that one. But what you will also see to remind you that you're in a 50 all the way as you're on that bit of road are these small dinner plate sized repeater signs. So that's their function. It will remind us we're not in a 30 or a national speed limit, but we are in a 50 or a 40, or as I said, the occasional 60 on a dual carriageway too. So the repeaters, how far apart are they? Well, they can be quite a long way apart, actually. I believe they can be up to 700 meters apart in a 50 limit. I would like some confirmation of that if anybody knows where I can find that rule, but that's what I've read. So if we're in the position of a test candidate and we suddenly notice there are no street lights, then all we actually have to do is ride along for a minute or so, scanning hard for the repeaters, and hopefully we'll spot the repeater when it's several hundred meters away, and we'll know that we are no longer in the 30 limit. If it's no repeaters, we assume national speed limit. If we see repeaters, we know what the appropriate speed limit is. And the examiner will almost always give the candidate a moment on test to figure out that limit. Now, this is where it does get complicated. It's the 20 limits and the 20 zones. Now, they're normally buried in a 30 limit, but we have to remember that there is a difference between them. This is a 20 limit sign. Okay, it just looks like any other speed limit sign. It tells us we've entered a speed limit where it's 20, and there should be 20 limit repeater signs to remind us while we're on that 20 limit. They're relatively easy to spot. Now, here's the confusion. That is a 20 limit zone. And as you can see, it has the word zone on the plate under the 20 sign. So just like any other zone, we'll enter the 20 zone and see a sign as we go into it, and we'll see a sign telling us what the speed limit has gone up to when we leave it again. But everywhere in between, it'll be a 20, and there is no warning that we're in a 20. Now, originally, the aim was to make these 20 zones self-enforcing and thus obvious, and they would be combined with traffic calming measures such as speed humps, pinch points, chicanes, and the sort of random planters that you see stuck in roads to physically and visually reinforce the nature of the road. The area where I live is now a 20 zone. As you turn into the road at the end, there's a 20 zone sign, but then you can wander your way through the roads locally, backwards and forwards, in and out of side turnings for quite some distance before you leave that 20 zone. But these roads all have speed bumps on. So there's a rule of thumb. If there's traffic calming in a new road after a turn, try and work out whether or not it's likely to be a 20 zone. Now, here's the problem. Some councils have seen fit to impose blanket 20 limits over their entire jurisdiction. And that means there are effectively main roads with no traffic calming, but within an active 20 limit. Islington in London, I think, was the first council to do this. And it was on their boundary, as I said, that I nearly got caught out myself some years ago. So what councils have done to try to make these 20 zones a bit more obvious, because if people aren't slowing down, what's the point in having them? They have started painting 20 roundels markings on the road surface itself, but it is still very possible to get confused. It's not always obvious if you're in a 30 or a 20 zone. So again, my advice is look for the road. If it's relatively narrow and it's obviously residential, and if it has speed bumps, assume a 20. It won't hurt particularly if you're riding slower than the 30 limit down such a road. No examiner would expect you to ride down those quickly. If it's a wider main road and you're not sure, have a look to see what everybody else is doing. If they're all driving along at 25 miles an hour, there's a very, very good chance you're actually in a 20 limit. If they're all doing 35 miles an hour, it's likely you're in a 30 limit. So is this advice practical? Is it easy to apply? Well, it does sound complicated, but it's actually a lot easier if you think about following these simple rules. And it saved me actually on test. I took my car test 20 years or so after passing the bike test. Now, I'd been a courier. I had a fairly good idea of how speed limits worked. It was fairly useful not to pick up speeding tickets as I was working. And I'd also, of course, started as a bike trainer at that time too. So I had a refresher on these rules. So when I took my car test, I was on a housing estate with a 30 limit, and suddenly I turned out onto a short link road, and I hadn't been down that particular road before, and literally just about 20 meters long, that's all it was. And suddenly I was out onto what looked like a country lane with fields either side. And I wasn't familiar with this road at all. But all I did was I had a good scan up and down the road. I couldn't see any repeaters, and I couldn't see any streetlights. I had a moment to think about what I was doing because I was passing a school, so obviously that was a place to keep the speed down a bit. But I figured out that I was on a national speed limit, and accelerated as soon as I was past the school up to a reasonable speed for the road. And about half a mile later, I turned off this lane again, back into the other side of the housing estate, and bingo, past the 30 limit sign. And a quick glance in the mirror showed me that, in fact, it had been a national speed limit. So the result there was a pass simply by using a bit of wit and some knowledge of the speed limits. Right, okay, that is it for today. A couple of points. Nick has looked in a bit on the late side. Hello, Nick. We've got a story about Germany today. Kevin has said many requirements for repeaters were relaxed. He says he thinks that was in 2012, and he's given me a briefing document to read there. I will have a look at that. Thank you, Kevin, and have a read on that one. So just a quick reminder, the winter gift vouchers are still available. What was I about to say about them? Yes, you can get those from the coffee shop just today and tomorrow. After that, I'm afraid it's full price if you book a course, but just for a couple more days, if you want to book a training course with me, you can make some savings by buying a gift voucher, which are worth a little bit more when you come to redeem them than they were when you bought them. And the other thing to remind you of is the live Better Biking webcast, which goes out on Wednesday, the 2nd of March. This one, it will be looking at group riding, and once again the idea is to help you avoid some of the mistakes that people make, either leading a ride or simply turning up on one. So there's the link if you want to book a ticket for that. It's a £5. That's Wednesday 2nd of March at 8 p.m. Do come along and find out about some group riding. And don't forget, the next live webcast in April will be the full Science of Being Seen presentation. So that is it for another show. Thank you once again for looking in. And I've lost my outro video. There it is. If you're out there on the bikes today, do take it easy out there. It's a lovely day for riding, much better than the storms we had this time last week. So stay shiny side up, and hopefully see you on Wednesday.